Good morning, everybody, and welcome again to Procrastinator's Pit Stop. We have another amazing guest for you today. We have with us Bob Martin. Bob is a professor of wellness and mindfulness coordinator at Elon University, and he draws on 4 decades as a criminal trial lawyer, Taoist, Buddhist, Christian practices, and a master of social work to help individuals and organizations transcend limiting narratives and reach their highest potential. Guided by his mentorship under a 72nd generation Taoist master and informed by brain science, Eastern and Western psychology, and spirituality, he now shares his unique blend of expertise through teaching, writing, and advocating for humanity's inherent goodness. Bob, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
We're happy to have you as well. There's so much we can dig into here. I'm really excited about this in particular. But before we dive into it, we do like to have an icebreaker on the show. And the question for you today is, which cartoon character do you resonate with the most and why?
Wow, what a great question. So I'll tell you what comes to mind right away, and I don't know what cartoon that it came from. I think it was the same one as Yosemite Sam or those, but it was this bulldog, and whenever he got thrown a bone, he would grab the bone and he'd float up to the sky, and then he would gently float down, and there would be hearts swirling all around him. And sometimes I just think that, I just relate to that. So that's what comes to mind.
I definitely love that one for sure. So let's dive into the one of the main questions we have for you because I'm interested in hearing your take on it. What is procrastination to you? How do you define it, and what does it mean to you personally?
Well, I can only tell you from how it, shows up for me. And of course, for many of my students, they talk about procrastination, and we kind of work through that with mindfulness tools. But for me, it's I'm always belabored by the question, how am I going to do this? What am I going to say? Because it usually comes with sitting down and writing for me, because I'm a writer. So what am I going to say? How am I going to start? And I get all of these how, why questions as if I really don't have a clue, until I finally start. And then I find that I do have a clue, but it's just a series of thoughts that are an obstruction. They're just forming, a reason why to do it. But, when you talk about procrastination, the funniest skit I ever saw on procrastination was Ellen DeGeneres does a skit on procrastination, and it is absolutely hilarious.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing that. And we know that there's no silver bullet, and you just mentioned you use mindfulness and meditation as your secret sauce. Can you explain a little bit about that?
In terms of procrastination?
Well, in terms of procrastination, yes.
Yeah. So one of the things that we do as we practice meditation is we begin to understand that we're not our thoughts. Because when we're procrastinating and those thoughts come up, it's like they're very powerful things that kind of control us. They raise a sense of fear or foreboding in us, or distraction and the like. And one of the things that we do in meditation is we practice stepping out of our thoughts and watching our thoughts. The scientists call it metacognition, thinking about our thinking. And as long as we're just thinking, we're in our thoughts and we're controlled by them. When we start thinking about our thinking, we move into kind of a somewhat slightly different ego state where things are a little less emotional and a little bit more stable. And so we start to recognize, oh, that's just a thought. I'm not that thought. I am the creator of that thought. So the moment I can say, oh, it's just a thought, and I can't hold it in my hand. I can't sell it. I can't trade it. It's going to be here, and I can't even hold on to it because it's going to be gone in a moment, and it's going to be replaced by another one. So it's virtually worthless. And the moment I can decide which thoughts I want to take action on and which thoughts are just going to let them pass by, I start to be able to become more effective in my thinking. And so now, these days, when I have those thoughts, I want to sit down, I start having those thoughts. I know this may sound counterintuitive, but I actually start giggling because I think it's just funny because I've had those thoughts 1,000 times, and 1,000 times I've sit down, and sometimes I've even written brilliant things. So how crazy is it that these thoughts that have no connection to reality keep coming into my head? So it's like I like to quote that Simon and Garfunkel song. Hello, darkness, my old friend. Hello, thought. Hello, particular thought, my old friend. And I don't try to resist it, and I don't try to make it go away, because what you resist persists. I just greet it and I befriend it and I say, there you are. Thanks for showing up. And it kind of says, well, this guy is no fun to bother anymore. And it goes away.
No, I really like that. And it segues into my next question for you, actually. So what is your journey? What has been your journey that has brought you to this, this way of life for you now? I mean, how did you get to where you are today?
So much my story. So I grew up in an amusement park family. My folks had the cotton candy popcorn stand, and we traveled a bit, and we were in amusement parks, Rockaways, Playland, Queens, New York, on the beach. And much to my dad's dismay, I became a lawyer. And it was, not just to give you a time frame, we're talking the 70s. So we're talking the times of Scarface and Miami Vice. In Miami, I worked for Janet Reno. Some of your audience might be old enough to remember that name. She was the Attorney General in the Clinton administration. She was the one they say is responsible for Waco and that terrible tragedy. But she was my boss. She's a crazy, wonderful human being. I rose up in the office pretty quickly, and I was a pretty well-respected prosecutor, and we went and filed a civil case against the cartels and the mob. We hit them for a lot of money, up in the millions and millions. And shortly thereafter, I went out in private practice, and the Italian leg of the Miami conglomerate came to see me and basically said that they were pretty impressed with me since I beat their lawyers, and they wanted to start sending me clients. So I became a mob lawyer, so to speak. Not like consigliere, but just getting a lot of referrals. And I was doing so well, so exceedingly well, and I was so full of myself. I was just the cat's meow and very well respected in my profession and making a whole lot of money. Got my house paid off by the time I was 32, and just sitting on top of that particular world. But my personal life was going to hell. And I was seeing a therapist, and I was hanging out doing too much of that. Again, it was the cocaine powder days. So, use your imagination. And so I was seeing a therapist, and I came to an important crossroads in my life. And at that point, I asked him this question, should I continue down this road that needs money and refinance my house or not? And rather than giving me some nice therapeutic answers for which I was paying him, he picked up some coins and started throwing them on the table and making mathematical calculations and drawing strange lines, and resulting in an equal sign and then a number like 32. They turned behind him, picked up this big book, opened it to chapter 32, and showed it to me. And the title of the chapter was Retreat. So what happens when your therapist becomes a tarot card reader? You curse them out and you stomp out, But it was the right advice. It was like it was tattooed on my head. So I went to that business that I was trying to get going, and I just told everybody, we're done. I'm out of money. We're closed. Sorry. Goodbye. Pulled back from a lot of my excessive behaviors. And I found out that my therapist was a disciple, but he was also the English language editor for Master Watching Me, who was a 72nd generation. Now think about that for a second. I figure out that comes to about 1,400 years of past and handed down wisdom. And Master Nee came to Miami, and the moment I met him, I knew It's just one of those things you just feel it. I just knew this is a man who I wanted to learn from. Now, I grew up in a family where God wasn't a discussion. We didn't have any discussion about God. My parents' ancestors, my dad was Hungarian royalty. The Bolsheviks wiped out all of his ancestry. My mom was Roma Gypsy. Everybody wiped them out. They just, could not put forward the hypothesis that there was a God. So I grew up without a God, although my dad was a very virtuous man, so I can't say I didn't have a good role model about how to live. But when Master Nee came, he gave me an owner's manual on how to live life in the Taoist way. And we could have a podcast about what Taoism is and what it is. But basically, if I had to put it in a nutshell, what Master Nee would define mastery in life to be, he would say, it's learning how to go with the flow so that you put out less effort, but are more effective and more efficient with less effort. That would be the goal of life, because if you can accomplish the things that you want to accomplish with the smallest interference possible, yet having the greatest impact, then your life is going to be happy and calm and serene. It's the way to a happy life. And, of course, the group asked him, is this possible? And he says, yeah, it is. It is possible. You understand it when it comes to an athlete. You say, oh, that guy was in the zone. He couldn't do anything wrong. And when he comes off the basketball court, you say, what a great game. And he goes, it didn't even feel like it was me out there. Well, Master Nee taught us that you could live your whole life in the zone. Now, admittedly, he spent his life in a monastery studying how to do it, and we don't. But we can take a few steps in that direction. So to answer your question, those practices led me to understanding that you can learn with happiness. You can learn wisdom if you can practice it. And as you practice it, you get better. There's just, I guess, one other little chapter. At that point, I ran into a little conflict with my mob clients, and everybody felt it was better if I left. So I moved to North Carolina. And when I got there, I had this beautiful opportunity presented to me of rewriting my life onto a blank canvas. I left the chrome and glass disco Miami for rural North Carolina, where the first case that I tried was the criminal charge of taking antlerless deer. So that's a far cry from first-degree murder, right? And it was a big culture shock, but it was exactly what I needed. And there is when meditation really became important to me. Eventually, a really important group reached out to me, and they asked me if I would commit to a 2-year rigorous teaching on becoming a meditation teacher, and I did. It's a long story, sorry, but
Don't be sorry. Don't be sorry for your story. There you go. I made a rhyme. Hey, thank you so much for sharing. It's actually very inspiring because, many of us can relate, not necessarily in the same situations, but many of us go through the hustle and bustle. I've been there, going through almighty dollar, hitting the pinnacle of, success, being unfulfilled and that sort of thing. But let me ask you, because, you've been doing this a very long time. One of the things that I especially run into a lot too with, people I work with, and I'm sure you run into it too, is in an increasingly distracted world, what do you do to try to limit that noise and get into meditation?
So, sorry, let me pick up on 2 words that you used and take them a step farther. You said limit that noise. So, that reminds me of what the most general reaction that I get from people when they find out that I'm a meditation teacher. And it goes something like this. meditation, I really need that, but it's not for me. I tried that a couple of times. I sat down, tried to quiet my mind, and my mind just went crazy, and I had all these thoughts. And I always have all of these thoughts, and when I try to go to sleep at night, I get all these thoughts and everything else. There's just no way I could ever quiet them. So, and I always, metaphorically, I always wish I could just grab them by the shoulders and shake them and say, "Hey, wait. That's not what meditation is. It's not about quieting the noise, and it's not about intentionally quieting the mind, because you can't do that. Hey, I've been doing this for 20 years, and my mind still goes into default mode where I'm in a fog of rumination and projection, thinking about whether I left the stove on and what I'm going to have for lunch, and did I forget that meeting, and did I check my to-do list and that deadline, and your mind just goes nuts. It's in default mode. We can get into the brain science of it, why that happens, but it's totally natural and it's totally proper that your mind does that. Besides which, you don't want to be mindful all the time. That would be exhausting. It's good, to be able to just let your mind go, and it just goes on its own. It doesn't need any effort. So it's fine. So then, if meditation is not quieting the mind, then what is it? And the best short definition that I could give it is a system of learning how to skillfully manage your thinking. So in order to manage your thinking, first you have to be able to know your thinking. Anybody that's in business knows, what is the solution here? Well, what's the problem? What's the data? So that crazy thinking, those thoughts that you have that are running, that's all your data. So we need to be able to let that happen and watch it. But it's different to just be thinking than it is to be noticing your thinking. And that's the little shift that meditation is. It's just taking a little while, not to stop it, but to allow it and notice it. And that, if you put it that way, we all do that to some extent. When we say, why did I say that? Or, oh, this isn't going in a good direction. Even as you're saying something, you're thinking, oh, this isn't going to go well. Okay. So that's thinking about your thinking. The difference is that we do that generally automatically, and we can shift to start doing that intentionally, paying a little bit more attention to that second voice that's commenting on our thinking. And if I can even be so bold, we can even start noticing the noticing of our thinking. Can you get, so it would sound like, I'm listening and I'm saying something, and then I'm going, this is going to go in the wrong way. And then you think, oh, look at that. I just noticed my noticing. That this is not so hard to imagine. So in meditation, we just have some techniques that we can teach that get us more familiar and awake and aware of that whole process. It's really just kind of sitting and allowing the thoughts to run, and noticing them as they run. Soon we begin to notice that those are not who we are. When we notice that, when we get that, and when I teach my kids, and I say my kids because I do teach on campus, I also teach, I have a private practice where I teach, people online, but I do have classes on campus for credit. And so when I say my kids, that's what I mean. So I watch my kids and I get to see their logs. And in about 2 weeks of practicing only 10 minutes a day, all of a sudden their logs start sounding like, oh, now I get what you're saying. Oh, now I'm understanding. Oh, now I have climbed up on the bank of the river and I'm watching my consciousness. I get it. And at that moment, it's amazing that for the rest of the course, they start noticing all of the conditioning that's been imposed upon them. that the conditioning is really where the thoughts are sourced and that they have a say in the matter of accepting that or rejecting it. And so this is what I mean by skillfully managing. We get to watch our thoughts, and eventually we get to ask ourselves, gee, is that thought helpful? Or is it get in my way? And I'm not going to try to make it go away. I'm just going to watch it, and I'm going to notice how many times it comes. And I often think it's kind of like my thoughts are a silly little brat, and it wants to bother you. And the more attention you give it, the more it bothers you. Like a little kid, who's coming and doing something, you say, stop that, stop that. You got to stop that. And the more excited you get, the more they do it. But if you just say, Jimmy, I don't want to play that game. You go ahead and play it. I'm going in another room, or I'm just going to sit over here and read my book. You go do what you want. Eventually, Jimmy goes, yeah, this isn't fun anymore. And they leave and they stop. And that's how your thoughts are. If you just allow them to be, after a while, they kind of almost as if they get bored and say, I'm going to go somewhere else. And they stop coming. So slowly you start sorting through it all. And it's like cleaning out the attic of the conditioning. And you start to really craft the person who you decide you want to be. And there's an incredible freedom in that.
No, I definitely like that. And I also have a question as well, going back to, just recent developments. I mean, I'm going to say recent, last 20 years, I guess, between things like social media, there's thoughts that come in and they're not even our own thoughts even sometimes. Right. So would you say that it, again, you mentioned how studying in a monastery is very different. Do you think it's more difficult, say now, to maybe not difficult, but more of a challenge to sort through it now than it would have been, say, 10 years ago?
I've been teaching for 2 decades, and I teach people that have ADHD. I teach kids that come out of the foster and juvenile justice system. I teach corporate CEOs. I teach single moms. I don't see any difference between any of it. This is not time relevant. It's not even skill relevant or education relevant. It's not. These are radical acts that I'm asking my folks to do because, as I mentioned, most of the time we go through life caught up in a fog of rumination and projection. And what I'm just simply asking folks to do is to pay attention to that. And this is a new skill. This is not something we normally do in our life. So no matter what your education is, no matter what your experiences are, it really doesn't have a lot to do with that. Now, I will say trauma-informed meditation does require an extra level of sensitivity. For example, one of the meditations that we do is a body scan, where we pay attention to the physical sensations in different parts of our body. For some folks, different parts of the body carry a lot of pain and suffering. So there is some sensitivity that we need to have to those kinds of traumas. But other than that, I don't really see a lot of difference. I think it's accessible to everyone, at any age, except kids do take to it a whole lot easier. My 12-year-olds, it's like almost they look at me and they go like, no, duh. I had one kid, he was on the playground and he tells me we meet once a week for an hour. And then they practice on the app that I provide 10 days a week. And then they log that and I give them feedback every single day, which is make the way that I teach unique. You get contact with me every single day, just a little bit, just moving the foot a couple of inches. Anyway, Johnny, he says, yeah, Johnny was on the playground with me and he pushed me down and I was really mad and I was going to get up and punch him. But I remembered to do my breathing. So I went over to the bench and I sat down and I started to do my breathing and pay attention to my physical sensation. We didn't say it in this terminology, but this is how I paid attention to where I was feeling my anger in my body and what I was thinking. And so the anger went away. And then I thought that if I went out and I punched him, then we'd never be friends. Now, for that kind of a skill to be with a 12-year-old who comes out of the foster parenting system, I think is extraordinary.
Wow. I mean, yeah, that is definitely an extraordinary story. I mean, I don't know. I don't know how many 12-year-olds, well, I'm sure that any 12-year-old student of yours, but I can't really picture how many 12-year-olds would have that amount of, I guess, awareness, right? We're talking about awareness and emotional regulation.
Well, I would say it's that, but the way that I would phrase it as a meditation teacher, because I would phrase it that way as a therapist, but as a meditation teacher, I would phrase it as it's hard to imagine a 12-year-old being that skillful because it's just skill. It's just skill, like learning to play tennis. It's just a skill. That's all it is.
Very true. And you said it was easier with children than it is with adults. I'm guessing that's because, less programming to kind of undo.
Yeah, less conditioning. Yeah.
And speaking about that, when we're talking about meditation, I mean, one of the obstacles some people come into is, they say, oh, I don't have a quiet place, or there's always the neighbor with the music or something like that. How do you approach that?
So that happens all the time in my classes, all the time. That's completely common. And the way that we deal with it is, like I say, they get an app, and on the app are all of the guided meditations and all the resources they need to do their 10 minutes of practice. When the gong goes off on the app, then a log comes up, and they immediately dictate or type in their reflection. That reflection comes to my dashboard in the morning. I get up at 4:00 every morning, and I sit down and I read the yesterday's logs from my students, and I answer them before 6:00, because I want them to have the feedback from yesterday before they practice today. And so I will get logs that sound like this. It was a terrible meditation. I didn't even meditate. I didn't do anything. I didn't even listen to the guidance because there was this dog barking, and I started trying not to be distracted by it, but I couldn't help it. I just felt myself getting angrier and angrier until, my cheeks were burning. And then, I wanted to get up and say something, but I didn't. And then all of a sudden the gong went off, and I can't believe the session was over and I didn't even listen to it. Okay? Typical of what you mentioned. So I get that. And what I would do with that is I would respond by saying, I don't think that was terrible at all. I think that was wonderful. I think there was a lot of data that you noticed. You noticed that there are something called distractions. You noticed that you tried to resist it, and you noticed what that felt like. You noticed that trying to resist the distractions did not work. And all that happened was that you get more and more upset. And you noticed what it feels like to get upset, because you mentioned your cheeks were burning. And you notice that when you're upset, time compresses because you were surprised that the thing was over. So look at all of the data that you noticed and learned about how you are and what you do in the face of, this is great. This is terrific data. Good job. I think that was a wonderful session. So they'll get that back from me that day. You might get stuff like that, and it'll continue on. They say, I couldn't focus. And I'll respond with, yeah, so you keep thinking that the goal is to focus, but the goal isn't to focus. The goal is to notice when your mind wanders. And so if your mind doesn't wander, then you're not meditating. So you're cool. And they continue to use the focus. So I say, Tell you what, let's see if we can use a different word than focus, because focus has a lot of baggage. Let's use wandering. So from now on, when you want to tell me that you couldn't maintain focus, just say it this way. Say, my mind wandered. So if I can start to even change their language, if I can start to move them into a different perspective, then a couple of weeks of that, and all of a sudden, the freedom breaks through, the conditioning breaks up, and the freedom, oh, I get it. Now I thought it was work. Now it's fun. And that, so with that, that's how I handle it with the daily adjustments. It takes a little while, couple of weeks, because people are pretty attached to, I got to concentrate. I got to focus. I got to be this particular way. It's good to focus. It's bad to lose your focus. It's good to concentrate. It's bad to be scattered. And then, from there, we can even move on to looking at all the judgments. Because I'll give you a little tip for your audience here. I love to quote the Bible in this regard. Somewhere in the Bible, it says, judge not lest you be judged. And everybody thinks that that's all about, it's not our job to judge, because when you go to heaven, the Heavenly Father will judge you. That's how most people see that. I see it very differently. See, Chris, you and I, we know that we've had different experiences, but the mere fact that we can talk to each other means that we kind of figure that our minds generally work alike. Generally, not according to our biases and our prejudices and our particular thoughts, but generally, if I talk to you, I have to believe that your mind generally works like mine. Otherwise, it wouldn't mean anything, right? So if I'm going around judging a lot, I'm judging people. I don't like the way that person looks. They shouldn't wear that. Their hair, I can't believe they got that tattoo, blah, blah, blah. And then, of course, there's all the biases and the other ugly stuff that we judge people. If I'm doing that a lot, because I believe that most of our minds work pretty much, I am fairly convinced that you're walking around judging as well. And that means that you're judging me. So the more I judge, the more I wind up feeling judged. And feeling judged is a terrible way of going through life. It certainly is not a happy way. So one of the things that we start looking at inside of our thoughts is our judgments. And as we begin to understand that our thoughts are just these little electrical impulses, we start to understand that our judgments are also just that. Now, I'm not saying we shouldn't be discerning, and we shouldn't go step out in front of a bus because we think that, what the heck, I don't have to judge things. If I can in any way start to reduce the amount of this unnecessary judging that I do, good, bad, like, don't like, I'm going to start feeling less judged. So judge not lest you be judged really is see if we can reduce the amount of judging that we do, and we'll have a much happier life.
That is such a powerful note to have here. And thank you so much for that. And then, it does shine a lot of light on that subject, because we're in a society where we're kind of programmed to, say, well, heck, so, social media. Yeah, I like this. I thumbs down, thumbs up. We're programmed to do that. And it's because we do that, then we're projecting that, oh, everybody else must be doing the same. And, Bob, it's been a really great conversation, a lot of great insights. We're coming up close to the time here. Is there anything you feel I should have asked that I didn't ask, or anything you feel we should have covered that we didn't cover today?
Yeah, I would just say, and I would emphasize this very simple statement. Let it burn into your forehead the way retreat burned into mine. Okay? You're not your thoughts. You're the creator of your thoughts. We even reflect this in our language. We say, I had a thought. But who is the I that had the thought? Well, you've got a choice. Either the I can be all of the conditioning that came from your family and society and the environment, or You can do the work of going in and cleaning out the attic and deciding who the I is that you want it to be. And you can then change your thinking. You can manage your thinking. Can I tell you one other little quick story? So brain science tells us that you can use your mind to actually restructure your brain, called neuroplasticity. So the taxi drivers in London are required to know every nook and cranny of the city, every alleyway and the like. They have to do an incredible study and they put to a very rigorous test. So they decided that they would take pictures of their amygdala, which is the place where your directional concept is housed. I'm sorry, the hippocampus. Okay, actually hippocampi, because there's two. So they took a picture of the hippocampus, and then the subjects did their study, weeks of study about direction and the like. Then after the study, they took a picture of the hippocampus again, and they found that it had grown taller, wider, longer, and thicker. So you can actually use your mind to restructure your brain to facilitate the person that you want to be. We can do this. So I want to leave with that thought, even if nobody takes on meditation today. I hope that's something that they'll never unhear. You're not your thoughts. And that will just start building a sense of curiosity. Well, if I'm not my thoughts, then who am I? Then who am I?
Wow. Such an amazing, powerful note to end on there, Bob. Just before we go,
Mm-hmm.
what is the best way for us to learn more about your course? Maybe get your app, get in on the course, because something everybody needs.
Okay, so it's funny. I just started writing up a couple of self-assessment tools, like how much do I know about meditation, how self-compassionate am I, how happy am I, things like that. And I'll be publishing them on my webpage. So I think starting down and doing some self-examination like that would be helpful. I have written a free ebook, which is a primer on beginning. Is it for me? What is it? What is it not? How to get started, and where are the resources? So you can go to my webpage and download that. There's also 56 gigabytes of freely downloadable instruction sheets, guided meditations, audios, videos on my website that are free. And if you would like to speak with me, there's a contact button, and I'm happy to take your email and set up a 15-minute phone call and explore whether meditation is right for you. And of course, my courses and how they work and all of that. So I would say, I don't mean to be arrogant or pushy or salesy, but there's actually a lot of good free starter information on my website, and it's a good place to start. And it's at A Wise and Happy Life.
Well, excellent. And that's very generous. Honestly, 56 gig, that's a lot. So I'd encourage, all our listeners, don't worry about grabbing a paper and pen. We're going to have that in the show notes for you. You'll be able to find it. Bob, again, thank you so much for being on the show. To all our listeners, thank you for tuning in. And, maybe just remember, if you can't find that motivation or inspiration for yourself today, maybe just go out and try to be that motivation and inspiration for someone else. And we'll see you again next time.